Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you today. My name is Uri. I'm a member and a founder in a group called The Guild. And today I'm going to talk with you about GraphQL Hive, which is a SaaS service that we provide. And the interesting thing about it, it's also completely open source. So there's two basically interesting things in this talk that hopefully will be interesting for you. One is what is Hive and why you need it if you have a GraphQL API. And the other one, this could give you a glimpse into how we, the Guild, is doing GraphQL internally at scale. When we create applications, our own applications, and we run it at scale, how we build GraphQL and how we build our servers, our services, and front end and back end, and all of the above. And that's because we insisted that the GraphQL Hive, even though it's a SaaS service, it's also open source and could also be self-hosted. So everything is public, the roadmap is public. So let's dig into it. So first of all, those of you who haven't heard about the Guild, we're a special group of open source developers. We create many different tools in the ecosystem like GraphQL CodeGen, GraphQL Mesh, GraphQL Yoga, and many others. All these tools are built by the group, but they're under individual names and under individual maintainers that you might know. You can check out more details in our website. But the idea is that we build these tools because we needed them. We needed them when we work with major companies, and we saw that things were lacking in the industry. So these tools are being used every day by us, and they're maintained for the long term. Like some of our tools just keep being maintained daily for 4 or 5 years, which is surprisingly rare. And we just keep on growing. And it's not because we want to grow necessarily, it's just because there's a lot of need for sustainable, powerful, reliable open source and solutions in the community. So this is who we are a bit. And as you can see, there's many different tools we create. And the idea is that we need these tools and use those tools when we build our applications, and they fit into many points in your stack. But you don't have to use them. You can use any other tools in the ecosystem and integrate specific tools that we create. We give you complete freedom. We don't want to lock you in. We want you to use the right tool at the right place, always. Today, though, I'm going to talk about our latest tool, which we are using and building for over a year. So for us, it's not that latest, but many, I think, haven't heard about it. And this is GraphQL Hive. Hive is a GraphQL schema registry that also does performance monitoring and basically manages your whole workflow as a company around GraphQL. So let's dive deep into this project. First of all, for the history, a very important part of that history is another tool that we create and keep maintaining. The name is GraphQL Inspector. If you haven't heard about this tool, I highly suggest for you to go to the website. I think when we created GraphQL Inspector, it was because a very specific value that GraphQL can give you that I think sometimes people are overlooking this. So one of the major benefits that GraphQL gives you, beyond performance, beyond type safety, and all this stuff that we already know, is basically the very strong ability to manage versions, basically versioning of API, prevent breaking changes. And this is because let's say, different capability of GraphQL, because GraphQL has queries. So you, as the person that creates the API, you know your usage. It's kind of like when you have Google Analytics on your website, but for your API, you know not only which endpoints your users are using, but also which specific fields they're using. So you have a lot of more information that helps you in many ways. It can help you to improve performance and things like that, or for type safety, but it also helps you to prevent breaking changes and manage versioning in a completely new way. So building on this ability of GraphQL, we created many years ago GraphQL Inspector. GraphQL Inspector is a tool that basically helps you with a couple of things. First of all, it integrates into your system and into your, let's say, Git repository to identify what changes you made in your schema. And it will let you know if you made breaking changes. For example, if now you removed posts from query, that means it's a breaking change. If someone is using posts, then you know that they got breaking. So this tool just basically takes two versions of your schema, the previous versions and the new version, and gives you a report of what broke and what not. Like, what changes did you make overall, and which one of them are dangerous, which ones of them are breaking. And it does it by statically analyzing your schema. So it gives you, but by statically analyze your schema and your documents and all your queries and mutations in your source code, it can do more things. It can basically say, if you created a query that actually doesn't exist. So it's a very powerful tool. There's more things it could do, right? It can run in your CI and gives you those reports. If you create a PR and that PR creates a breaking change, you can fail the CI and then that way protect your application from creating breaking changes. It also has a GitHub action and the GitHub app, so you can actually get these reports directly inside GitHub. And even has notifications that you can basically track all these changes into your Slack or whatever other tool that you're using. There's another powerful thing that, by the way, GraphQL Inspector can do, is that we recently collaborated with Escape, which is a company that's focused on GraphQL security, and they built a library. It's called GraphQL Armor. And GraphQL Armor is a library that protects your server, like from it does query, like depth limiting and all kinds of like default abilities to basically protect your GraphQL API. But the thing is, you need to configure your defaults, and each server has different defaults. But because GraphQL Inspector statically runs on your code, we can basically find all your queries and find the right defaults for you. So that's another ability. It's called GraphQL Inspector Audit. It's very new, that you can run and basically find the right defaults, security defaults for your GraphQL API. And it does more things like find similar names in your schema, like how similar they are. So maybe you have duplicates on your schema. And also coverage, like it can run across all your queries on source code and then compare that to the schema and tells you, for example, if you have, let's say, fields in your schema that is not being queried by any query in your source code. So that's a great tool. It has, it gives us a lot of powerful things, and we highly recommend it. It's completely open source. If you're using GitHub, it has a GitHub app. If not, you can just put it in your CI, and you should definitely use that. But the thing is, there's another problem here. All these abilities are great, but they're built on static analysis of your code, which is great and powerful, and you should do that. But sometimes, most cases, when you go into production, you actually need to analyze real life data in order to have the same analysis that GraphQL Inspector is doing. And this is very important because, for example, if you shipped a mobile app, and in the mobile app, you shipped certain queries, and then you released a new version that doesn't query these queries anymore. So now if you run Inspector, it will tell you, those queries are not there. They're not in your source code. But there's still live clients that keep querying your API, so you can't make this breaking change. Also, if you run GraphQL Inspector and just prevent all breaking changes, it means that every time you add an API, you basically can't remove it. which is okay. It protects you and you can evolve your API, but at some point, you want to see if, let's say, nobody queried a certain field for 30 days, you want to say that this is not a breaking change. And you maybe want to get a report of all these unused schema fields, so you can remove them and even more easily evolve your API. So live data is critical here. So that's why we created Hive. Hive is basically takes all the different abilities, it builds upon and uses all the different abilities of Inspector, but it adds to it live data and storage. So it can do much more powerful things. So what Hive is doing? First of all, it can, like I said, it can do the same checks that the Inspector does, but more. So when it does schema checks, it not only checks if your schema is valid and doesn't introduce a breaking change, but also it checks, let's say, for example, if you have multiple services and you merge them, whether it's federation, whether it's schema stitching or any other method, it basically checks that once you merge those in whatever way you want to merge your schemas, it's still valid. So it does those schema checks in your CI as well. But it also, on top of these things, it basically collects data on the usage of each of these fields. Now, by the way, the data collection that Hive is doing, the Hive client runs on your server, and the data that it sends is completely obfuscated. It doesn't expose any real identity data. It's completely removes all the sensitive data before it sends just the usage data into Hive. But that usage data is extremely interesting because now we can do all the things that we talked about. I'll show it in a second. And also, if we have multiple services and we run in the CI the schema checks, now we have the latest schema version of that service. So Hive will store that latest schema in a high availability CDN that is, by the way, separated from Hive. So if for whatever reason Hive is going down, your servers will still run and it won't affect the availability of your own servers. And then your gateway, whether your gateway is Apollo Federation, whether it's Apollo Router, whether it's schema stitching or GraphQL Mesh, your gateway can read those schemas directly from Hive, refresh itself, and in whatever method you prefer, and then move to a new version of the merged or federated schema. And it also gives you a history of changes and integrates into your workflow, just like we saw on GraphQL Hive. So let's see a bit of Hive. So Hive, like we said, first of all, in terms of monitoring, you can connect it to any server. It can be Apollo server, it can be Apollo router. If you have GraphQL Ruby or Laravel or any other language, you can connect this, or Yoga, of course. You can connect this into Hive, and then you will start sending this information into Hive. And first of all, the first thing is that we can show you error rates, we can show you latencies, we can show you the different clients that are using your API, and we can show you all the usage numbers over time, including the most popular queries or the slowest queries. So you can go in and analyze where you have a problem. But we started collecting all this data, not because we wanted to display this, but we wanted to give you a smarter way to handle your workflows. So once you publish a schema, Hive, first of all, gives you a history of all the changes to your schema, what are them are breaking and what are them not. But when we say breaking, it's more sophisticated because we have real data. So breaking change, you can define what is a breaking change. For example, if field invite code was removed from organization, but nobody was using it in the last 30 days, and this is configurable by yourself, it won't be considered a breaking change, and it will pass through your CI. So that's a very powerful thing. And you can also get like a report showing schema coverage from live data, like I showed before on Inspector, to tell you what fields are being used and what not, how much they're being used, basically an overview of your schema usage, which we see that many companies want, and it's a very, very powerful feature. And when we build it, like I said, we started building it first of all for ourselves because we needed it, and we needed it to be as a solution that is completely open and can handle basically any GraphQL API, including our own GraphQL Mesh gateway. GraphQL Mesh, if you don't know, it's a library that we maintain that basically takes any API protocol, for example, Swagger or OpenAPI, gRPC, SOAP, converts them into GraphQL, and then can basically automatically expose a GraphQL gateway based on an API that is completely not GraphQL. So you can query in GraphQL an OpenAPI service, for example. The interesting thing is that in many of our clients, they had many different services that didn't move or didn't want or couldn't migrate or just were in the slow process of migrating into GraphQL. So what we were doing, we were deploying GraphQL Mesh as the gateway, while all the existing services that these companies had still used, let's say, OpenAPI or JSON schema. And then what we've done is each service in the OpenAPI service, let's say a Java OpenAPI service, ran GraphQL Mesh converter in their own CI, checked for breaking changes and usage thanks to Hive, and then published their GraphQL schema into Hive. And now GraphQL Mesh read all the schemas. And what it created is we had in GraphQL Hive, we had basically a representation of all the schemas of all the services with any API protocol they had. And now the gateway could just read GraphQL APIs and redeploy itself. And you could just query GraphQL for any service, even if it's not GraphQL. So that's a very, very powerful workflow across all your API services, not only GraphQL. Now, when we started doing this, we went through our natural way of just open sourcing it, because we open source everything we do at the Guild, and we really believe in it. But also we saw that our clients, they didn't want to handle the schema registry, and they actually really wanted a hosted SaaS service, a hosted cloud service as a schema. And many of them, they wanted just to pay us. Many others, by the way, wanted to self-host and wanted the power to go through, to look into the source code and even contribute. And that's why what we created here, I must say, is very unique. We have a fully more successful than we even expected GraphQL hosted SaaS business that is completely open source. And when I say completely, I mean completely. It's an MIT license, and we open source everything, including our Stripe code and our deployment code and everything. So that's a very powerful thing, not only because we have a public roadmap that you can track, you can self-host, and you have full control of your code. We also created the huge community of many, many enterprise companies that help us shape GraphQL Hive. Some of them are using it as a SaaS service, and some of them are using it as self-hosted. So that's a very, very powerful thing, and we're very proud of it. And we're also very happy that it became so successful. We wouldn't expect it to be. It was an experiment at the beginning, and it was extremely successful. We're very proud of it. And the other very interesting part of the fact that this is open source is that I think for many years, the Guild has been leading the GraphQL ecosystem. We created many, many tools that all of you are using. But now we can show you, and by the way, Hive works in extreme scale. we're going to write many, many blog posts on how we got to that scale and how we manage that scale. But now you can look at how we, the guild, are using GraphQL in production, and not only GraphQL, how we do everything, including billing, including deployment, auth, and everything. So just a couple of examples. If you go today to the GraphQL Hive repository, you can see, first of all, how we do front-end. Like we use Next, and we use the codegen. By the way, there's another talk from Lauren in this conference about how we believe that a front-end GraphQL should be used. Our best practices of how using GraphQL on the front end, which I think is very different from what a lot of you are using, even if you're already using the codegen. So you can check out his talk about how we do that, but also you can go to GraphQL Hive and see how we use it ourselves. And also we use for the docs, we use Nextdoor, by the way, which recently we became the main maintainers of that project. Because all of our docs websites across all of our libraries are using Nextdoor. But you can also see how we do GraphQL itself. You know, we believe very strongly that the GraphQL Yoga is the best GraphQL server out there. So you can see how we, the guild, is using Yoga with Envelope, how we track errors in Sentry, how we federate the multiple services, but through GraphQL modules, with the build process to merge them, and how we protect our GraphQL API using Armor. Everything is open source. You can also see how, you know, Hive is a huge monorepo. And there's a lot of debates about how to do monorepo, and we believe we have a very good way of doing it. First of all, how to release. I don't know if many of you know about the change sets program, the change sets library. We're active maintainers of that project. We also contributors and sponsors for the project. And we released recently many, many updates for this project. So it's worth for you checking that. We also use Turbo Repo, but also for bundling to support ESM and not ESM across all of our projects, we use Bob the Bundler, which is a library that we created. And you should really check out if you want to see how to bundle your code and how to support many different environments. In terms of scale, in terms of DB, we use Postgres and ClickHouse. There's many reasons why we use ClickHouse, mostly because the enormous scale of and the enormous traffic that Hive needs to load. We would create a whole blog post, many blog posts and many talks about how we use it and what's the benefits of ClickHouse. We think it's amazing. We also collaborate with them. And but for now, you can just dive into the code and look at how we do everything. Same thing for how we do events, you know, with Kafka and Auth. By the way, recently we started from using Auth 0, and because we wanted Hive to be self-hosted and completely open source, we recently moved from Auth 0 to Super Tokens, which is an open source replacement, and it's worked very great for us. Also, in terms of deployments, you can see our whole deployment structure, which we think is very advanced. If you haven't heard about Pulumi, I think you should, and you should try it out, how we use Kubernetes, how we deploy to Azure, and how we use Cloudflare workers, and how we use the cache. So there's many different things that you can look, and when you want to build your app, when you want to build your startup, when you want to build your gateway, you can go into GraphQL Hive and just look how we do it. And also, if you have ideas or thoughts like this tool is better than that tool, this thing is better than that thing, come to Hive and show us. Like, this is the best way to actually check things. You know, if you think you have a better framework, or if you think we have a better library, come to Hive and show us how, and let's see on the open how we use GraphQL at scale and prove your library or prove your solution. So that's why we're very proud of making Hive completely open source. And you know, on top of that, Hive itself is using Hive. We use Hive in order to manage breaking changes into the service, monitoring live data and everything. So it's extremely fun. So for summary, I think that, you know, the guild started as like a very small group 5-6 years ago of building small library called the GraphQL codegen. And we just gradually grew with powerful contributors. We were able to support open source contributors and support the whole open source ecosystem, build a full open API ecosystem, including everything, and offer that ecosystem both as a SaaS service, but also as a completely open ecosystem. And I think that created us, that propelled us to create a very powerful community around our tools with amazing companies and amazing partners. And the power of it is just a cycle that keeps on growing. So I highly recommend you to check out GraphQL Hive, see how we do open source. You can go to GraphQL Hive website, or you can go to our website, the guild.dev. And last thing that I want to, something that I think is extremely interesting, first of all, because of that person, and second of all, because of the guild structure. GraphQL Hive is our main SaaS business, but it's also open source. Not only that it's open source, it is managed by a single contributor, and the library and the service lives under that individual. And that's Camille Kisiela. He built this from scratch. He manages it. He managed a team around it. He manages the clients. And he deserves all the credit for everything I talked about here today. And this, I think, for me, this is the best representation of what the guild is. All of our solutions and all of our libraries don't live under the guild. They live under individuals that are doing amazing work. They're responsible for their work, and they get the credit they deserve for it. So thank you very much. Check Camille and follow him, and see you in the next GraphQL Conf. Bye, everyone.